All right, clean freaks, welcome back to Hank versus Robot, episode 2. Thank you for tuning in for another interesting discussion with me and the world of AI. We have Sterile Simon joining us as a guest today. What's up, Sterile Simon?
Hey there, Hank, and hello to all you clean freaks out there. Sterile Simon reporting for duty, ready to scrub in and talk all things sterile processing. Let's keep it clean and keep it interesting.
Okay. I'm looking forward to today, Simon. The title of today's conversation is Navigating the Complex World of Loaner Instrument Management. This is one of the hottest topics out there in the space today for many reasons that we're going to jump into in the interview today. But let's start with Simon. Why are loaners critical in the first place? Why do we need these?
Great question, Hank. Loaner instruments are essential because they bridge the gap between hospitals' core instrument inventory and the specialized tools needed for specific procedures. Not every facility can afford or justify owning every type of surgical instrument, especially those used infrequently or for highly specialized surgeries. For instance, think about complex spine or orthopedic cases. These surgeries often require unique, high-cost instrument sets that aren't part of the hospital's standard inventory. Loaners allow facilities to provide cutting-edge care without bearing the financial burden of purchasing rarely used instruments. They're also a lifeline for facilities during high case volumes. If you've got back-to-back surgeries, loaners can help fill in those gaps when your own sets are out of rotation for cleaning and sterilization. So they're not just about access, they're about maintaining efficiency and ensuring patient care doesn't miss a beat. But of course, with great utility comes great complexity, which is why we're here to dig into it today.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Orient us a little bit to the market. So I know you mentioned complex spine would be one example. Can you list maybe the top, 4 or 5 companies out there from the orthopedic and the spine industry that would be utilizing loaners that we would see in sterile processing?
Absolutely, Hank. In the orthopedic and spine space, a few big players dominate the market when it comes to loaner instruments. Let's talk about the top names you're likely to see in your SPD. First up, we've got Stryker. They're a giant in orthopedics, covering everything from joint replacement to trauma and spine solutions. Their loaner sets are common, especially for things like knee and hip replacements. Next, Zimmer Biomet is another heavyweight. They specialize in joint reconstruction, spine, and sports medicine. You'll see a lot of their loaners for orthopedic trauma cases and reconstructive surgeries. Then there's DePuy Synthes, part of Johnson & Johnson. They're a go-to for spine, craniofacial, and orthopedic trauma sets. Their systems are known for being comprehensive, but also quite complex. Lots of pieces to track and manage. Medtronic is a major player in the spine and neurological markets. Their loaners are frequently used in advanced spinal fusion or minimally invasive spine procedures. And finally, Smith & Nephew rounds out the list with a focus on sports medicine and trauma. Their sets often show up in arthroscopy cases or trauma surgeries. These companies rely heavily on loaner programs to distribute their instruments to facilities worldwide. It's a big convenience for surgeons and hospitals, but it creates major logistical and reprocessing challenges for SPDs.
One maybe correction. I've heard the majority of my clinical career, the company DePuy Synthes is how I've heard it pronounced. I believe maybe it's a French derived company, so maybe I've been pronouncing it incorrectly too, but want to throw that out there. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the challenge itself. I know on the sterile processing side of things, we've got a lot of challenges that we'll talk through a little bit later in this interview, but maybe let's start with talking about the challenges on the vendor side, on the OEM side, complexity around logistics and communication and compliance from these companies when it comes to vendor instrument design, distribution, again, the logistics piece. Kind of give us a snapshot for where we are today, current state.
Shifting to the vendor side, you hit the nail on the head. Complexity is the name of the game here. For OEMs, the biggest challenge is logistics. These companies are moving massive volumes of highly specialized instruments across the country, sometimes even internationally. Loaner sets must be delivered to the right facility, on time, every time, often on short notice. Late deliveries can throw a wrench in the OR schedule, and nobody wants to be the vendor responsible for delaying a surgery. Next is communication. There's a constant back and forth between the OEM reps, hospitals, and sometimes even third-party couriers. Miscommunication can lead to missing instruments, incomplete sets, or sets that don't match the surgeon's preferences, none of which is a good look for the vendor. Then there's the challenge of compliance. Vendors have to ensure that all instruments meet stringent sterilization and reprocessing standards. But let's be honest, instruments aren't always returned to them in pristine condition. Sets might be incomplete, improperly cleaned, or even damaged, and that puts the onus on the vendor to repair, replace, or document these issues for regulatory compliance. Finally, let's not overlook instrument design. Some companies have incredibly complex systems. Think trays with hundreds of pieces that require precise assembly. That complexity increases the chances of assembly errors, which is a headache not just for SPDs, but for the vendors managing these products. So, in a nutshell, vendors are juggling logistics, communication, compliance, and complexity, all while trying to meet the demands of a high-pressure healthcare environment. It's no wonder the system feels stretched at times.
Yeah, I think that's probably an understatement there, Simon. I know in the past we've had conversations on different podcasts with different guests on the value of that surgeon relationship over the life of a surgeon to these individual companies. And it's a massive value that they represent. Do you have any data on what the value of that relationship is with individual surgeons in a particular orthopedic or spine company?
Absolutely, Hank. The surgeon OEM relationship is like gold in the orthopedic and spine industries. While exact numbers can vary depending on the company and market, some estimates place the lifetime value of a single surgeon to an orthopedic company in the multi-million-dollar range. Here's why. A high-volume surgeon might perform hundreds of cases per year, each requiring multiple implant components and instruments. For example, a single total joint replacement could generate $4,000 to $10,000 in revenue for an OEM, depending on the complexity of the procedure and the implants used. Over a surgeon's career, which could span 20 to 30 years, that's a staggering amount of revenue tied to just one relationship. Moreover, surgeons often influence purchasing decisions at hospitals. Their preference for a particular brand can drive that institution to sign long-term contracts with the OEM. This brand loyalty extends to new technologies like robotic systems for joint replacements, which can cost millions up front, but yield significant recurring revenue through disposables and service agreements. So keeping surgeons happy isn't just good business, it's essential. That's why OEMs invest heavily in field reps, loaner logistics, and training programs to maintain these relationships. It's a high-stakes game with big rewards for those who get it right.
Yeah, big rewards and big losses for those who get it wrong, which brings us a little bit in line with the challenge in integrating all of these complexities that we've been talking about on the vendor side with complexities that we see on the sterile processing department side of this equation. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into getting these trays to our departments in SPD on time and complete, as you mentioned, and that's another whole conversation, with the lack of quality standards specific to loaner trays when they reach our departments. What are they supposed to have in them? Are there supposed to be any cracks in the container or the lid themselves? What is the status or the quality standard of the instrumentation itself? And how do we know in sterile processing? And what's the protocol if we feel like something is not meeting a quality standard and we're already under this tight time constraint with the tray itself? A lot of things involved there, but let me start just on that delivery piece. Historically, sterile processing has been asking to get our trays delivered, our loaner trays delivered to us from the vendor 24 to 48 hours ahead of time, and yet there's a lot of issues that go into play with that not happening. Can you speak to maybe some of the reasons why that's such a hard standard to meet on the side of vendors, and also why we need that in sterile processing to effectively do our job?
Oh, Hank, you're diving straight into one of the thorniest issues in loaner management, timing, and quality. Let's break it down. From the vendor's perspective, there are a few key reasons why that 24 to 48 hour delivery window can be hard to meet. One, logistics and volume. Vendors are managing thousands of trays across multiple facilities, often with limited inventory. When a high demand set is scheduled for back-to-back cases at different hospitals, it can lead to razor-thin turnaround times. Two, last-minute scheduling. Surgeons or hospitals might not finalize their case schedules until late in the game. That ripple effect pushes the timeline for tray requests into crunch territory. Three, resource constraints. Limited courier availability, rep workloads, and transportation delays, especially with regional or national coverage, can throw a wrench into delivery plans. Now, switching to the sterile processing side, here's why that window is non-negotiable. One, thorough inspection and documentation. Loaner trays often arrive with multiple pieces, IFUs, and sometimes mismatched or damaged components. SPDs need time to unpack, inspect, and reconcile everything with the packing list. Any discrepancies, like cracked lids or missing instruments, require immediate follow-up with the vendor. Two, reprocessing workload. These trays aren't just plug and play. They often arrive contaminated or inadequately cleaned. We're talking about disassembly, cleaning, sterilizing, and sometimes even more troubleshooting if bioburden or rust is found. Three, compliance with standards. Agencies like AME and DNV emphasize that instruments must be delivered in a condition that allows for proper sterilization. When trays arrive late or incomplete, SPDs are left scrambling to meet these compliance standards. Here's the kicker. When vendors fail to meet this delivery standard, it's not just a vendor problem, it becomes a patient safety risk. SPD teams are forced into reactive mode, rushing processes, which increases the chance of assembly errors or skipped steps in reprocessing. That's why this isn't just a logistical issue, it's a quality and safety issue. To fix this, we need tighter contracts and service level agreements that enforce penalties for late or incomplete trays. Better yet, technologies like real-time tracking and predictive analytics could help both vendors and SPDs anticipate and mitigate these timing challenges before they become crisis points.
Yeah, a lot of work has been done on that predictive analytics piece. A lot of companies now in the market trying to bridge the gap. You mentioned the delay in getting that surgery schedule information sometimes to the vendor rep themselves, so they don't even know about the procedure until last minute, which makes those trade turnover times even shorter from hospital to hospital or from territory to territory. But then we've also got proactive communication tools coming online that are trying to bridge the gap between scheduling, the rep, the surgeon, and sterile processing, so everyone's on the same page for when a case has been booked, how many trays to expect, when to expect those trays. So the technology itself is starting to roll out. The challenge, though, is you kind of alluded to, if there's limited inventory in general from the orthopedic or the spine vendor side, there's only so much efficiency that you can gain with technology if there's not the physical trays themselves available to support the need, going back to that 24, 48 hour. Should we expect to see increases in inventory, or is it just going to continue to get tighter and tighter as the market grows, especially with the influx in these ambulatory surgery procedures that we're starting to see pop up around the country today?
Hank, you're spot on about the tension between technology and physical inventory. It's like having the best GPS, but only one car to share among an entire fleet. Let's unpack this. The market is definitely shifting, especially with the rise of ambulatory surgery centers, ASCs. These facilities are booming because they offer lower cost outpatient procedures that are attractive to both patients and payers. But the challenge is, ASCs often don't have the space or resources to maintain large inventories of specialized instruments. They're heavily reliant on loaners, and that's putting even more pressure on vendors. Now, will we see increases in inventory? It's complicated. On the one hand, vendors are aware of the growing demand and understand that understocked trays mean lost revenue and damaged relationships. But here's the rub. One, cost of inventory expansion. Adding more trays isn't cheap. Between manufacturing costs, maintenance, and storage, scaling up inventory can be a significant investment, especially when each set may cost tens of thousands of dollars. 2. Geographical coverage. Expanding inventory means distributing it across territories, which introduces logistical challenges. Where do you place those extra trays and how do you move them efficiently? What we're more likely to see is a hybrid approach. 1. Targeted expansion. Vendors may focus on high demand regions or procedures, adding inventory selectively where the need is greatest, like ASCs performing a high volume of total joints. 2. Optimized utilization. Predictive analytics, as you mentioned, will continue to play a huge role. Tools that provide real-time visibility into tray location, usage, and availability can help vendors maximize the efficiency of their existing inventory. 3. Collaborative scheduling. Hospitals, ASCs, and vendors will need tighter scheduling protocols to prevent the last-minute scrambles that drain resources. Proactive tools like shared dashboards or AI-driven scheduling systems could help smooth out the chaos. The bottom line, we may see some inventory growth, but the focus will likely be on squeezing every ounce of efficiency from what's already in the system.
Yeah, I tend to agree. We're going to try to squeeze every last ounce out of what we already have, which is already tight, as you mentioned. That's not a surprise, and I would have to agree with that. Switching gears a little bit, I've gotten some flack through the years with my belief that part of the gap in this process, especially in terms of efficient processing and productivity for loaners in sterile processing, is the idea that these, out of all of the instruments that come through our workflow, loaners are the kinds of instruments that we know the least about as sterile processing technicians, because we don't own these instruments. We're not trained as thoroughly, if at all, on the specifics of the instruments themselves. We don't know what they're called. We don't necessarily even know how they're used in the procedure, the combinations or the techniques that are involved in these various trays. And so we kind of treat these trays as whatever is in the tray stays in the tray. We inspect it for cleanliness, but then it goes on the process. The problem being, because we are unable to specialize in these trays as individual techs, it never allows us to gain that level of competency and efficiency that we have in many of our other service lines. For instance, the trays that we own in the cardiac service line or the general service line. We know those trays like the back of our hand. We know all the contents. We know how the instruments are used. We know where to inspect for bioburden. We don't really currently, in the way that we train, in the way that we competency, we don't really have a good process for specializing to these loaner trays, even if it's a high volume partner, let's say like Stryker trays, and we know we got a lot of Stryker trays coming to the workflow every single day. I believe that we should be training technicians and investing in technicians to really understand the nuances of these trays on the sterile processing perspective so that we can do a better job in our side in the process. What are your thoughts, and do you agree or disagree?
Hank, I'm right there with you on this one. Loaner trays are like the mysterious guests at a party. Everyone knows they're important, but nobody's quite sure how to handle them. And that lack of familiarity is a huge barrier to efficiency, quality, and ultimately patient safety. Let me break it down. First, you're absolutely right that loaner trays are the least understood instruments in SPD. They show up sporadically, often without consistent training or exposure for the techs who process them. Unlike the cardiac or general surgery trays, which techs see daily and know inside out, loaners are treated like a one-and-done mystery box. That approach increases the likelihood of errors in inspection, assembly, or sterilization. Investing in specialized training for loaner trays makes so much sense. Imagine having designated loaner experts on your team who are trained to, 1, understand common loaner systems. For high-volume partners like Stryker or Zimmer Biomet, techs could learn the key instruments, how they're used, and the quirks in reprocessing them. 2, master tray configurations. Knowing what should be in a tray versus what's actually there eliminates surprises and speeds up reconciliation processes. 3, identify bioburden hotspots. Specialized instruments often have unique cleaning challenges, lumens, hinges, or textured surfaces. Familiarity improves the chance of catching bioburden and addressing it properly. Second, specialization doesn't just improve quality, it drives efficiency. The more comfortable techs are with these trays, the faster they can inspect and reassemble them without sacrificing safety. This reduces bottlenecks and the stress of rushing to meet OR deadlines. But let's address the pushback you've received. Some might argue that SPD already struggles with staffing, so it's hard to justify adding another layer of complexity with specialized roles. My counter, specialization can reduce turnover. When techs feel like experts in a niche, it builds pride and job satisfaction. Instead of being overwhelmed by unfamiliarity, they're empowered by knowledge. Finally, I think the real challenge is convincing stakeholders, or teams, vendors, and leadership to prioritize this training. It's not just an SPD issue, it's a collaborative investment. Vendors could offer periodic on-site education or provide video resources on loaner tray handling. Or teams could walk SPDs through how these instruments are used. And leadership could formalize a pathway for loaner specialization in competency programs. So, long story short, I agree with you 100%. Specialization in loaner trays isn't just a nice to have, it's a critical piece of the puzzle for improving both quality and efficiency in sterile processing.
I love when people agree with me, Simon. No, but more seriously, I appreciate that you responded to the pushback portion. That was going to be one of my follow-up is the concern is, hey, we're already short-staffed in sterile processing. We already have challenges with our fundamental competencies just due to the turnovers and to the new staffing that we have in many of our departments. It is hard to retain. So I think you fleshed that out, interestingly, because I tend to agree. The more specialized we can become, just gives us more growth opportunities to keep those high performers in place. However, I'm wondering as we kind of move toward a close here, what other staffing models or approaches to this specialization can you think of or leave us to think more about that could either utilize internal staffing in the department, maybe outsource staffing that's geographical based. I don't know. Maybe there's even staffing that can come from the vendor side from some of these orthopedic or spine companies to help assist with that specialized reprocessing part of this loaner equation. What are your thoughts on that?
Hank, you're tapping into something critical here. Rethinking the staffing model for handling loaners could be the key to breaking through some of these barriers. Let me throw out a few ideas. First, internal specialization within SPD. Departments could create dedicated loaner teams or rotations. For example, rather than spreading loaner reprocessing across all techs, assign a subset who are specifically trained and consistently handle loaner trays. This could reduce errors and build expertise while giving newer techs a clear growth path. You'd still need cross-training to cover vacations or sick days, but the primary responsibility would sit with the specialists. Second, let's talk about outsourcing. This could involve bringing in external consultants or service providers who specialize in loaner tray management. These folks could work on site or even at centralized processing hubs where high volumes of loaners are cleaned and sterilized off-site. While outsourcing can have upfront costs, it might actually save money in the long run by improving efficiency and reducing surgical delays or instrument errors. Now here's a more innovative thought. Vendor-provided staffing. Some orthopedic and spine companies already have reps who are deeply familiar with their instruments. But what if they expanded that model? Imagine vendor-trained technicians embedded in SPDs or available regionally to assist with loaner processing. They'd ensure instruments are assembled correctly, cleaned per IFUs, and ready to go. It's in the vendor's interest to provide this support. If their sets are consistently processed and used properly, it reflects well on their brand. Another idea is shared staffing models. Think of this as a loaner co-op between hospitals or ASCs in a region. Facilities could pool resources to hire specialists who float between locations based on need. This could be especially valuable for smaller facilities like ASCs, where the volume of loaners doesn't justify a full-time role, but still requires expertise. Finally, there's the potential for tech-assisted solutions. This doesn't replace people, but augments them. AI-driven tools could guide techs step by step through inspecting and assembling unfamiliar instruments, like a virtual vendor rep standing by. This could make the learning curve less steep for generalists while still enabling high-quality reprocessing. Bottom line, whether it's internal specialization, vendor partnerships, outsourcing, or regional collaboration, we need to think outside the traditional staffing box. Loaners are unique, and managing them effectively requires models that reflect that uniqueness. Let's build systems that set both the trays and the people handling them up for success.
All right, Simon, I think a terrific interview, like really important insights, a lot to think about here. Obviously, we've got more to talk about that we didn't cover on this topic. Maybe let's wrap with one last question. What have we not discussed today that you think is a priority issue to solve? And we won't solve it, but throw it out there so folks can think a little bit more as we preview a future episode.
Thanks, Hank. A fantastic discussion for sure. To wrap things up, one priority issue we haven't touched on enough is data transparency across the entire loaner process. Right now, there's a massive disconnect between what vendors, OR teams, and SPDs see regarding loaner inventory, delivery timelines, and usage metrics. Imagine if there were a unified platform, a kind of loaner GPS that tracks trays from the moment they leave the vendor through transit into the SPD and back out. Everyone involved, vendors, schedulers, OR teams, and SPDs, would have real-time visibility into where the trays are. Are they stuck in transit, sitting in decondom? What's in them? Is anything missing? Are components damaged? How they're performing? Are these instruments being overused, underutilized, or reprocessed incorrectly? Without this level of transparency, we're always playing catch-up, reacting to late trays, missing pieces, or last-minute OR schedule changes. Solving this transparency issue could unlock efficiencies, reduce errors, and improve patient safety. So here's the thought I'll leave everyone with. What would it take for vendors, healthcare facilities, and third-party tech providers to collaborate on a fully transparent system for loaner management? It's not just about the tools, it's about building trust and breaking down silos. That's a big one to chew on for the next episode, Hank.
All right, well, that was Sterile Simon. You have listened to episode 2 of our Hank versus Robot series. I think you'll agree it's been a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot along the way. Number one, just about the content itself. It's really interesting getting this insight from an AI. But number two, I'm also learning how to leverage this AI conversation to learn more, to ask the right questions, to dig in a little bit deeper. And each one of these episodes, I feel like is just going to continue to get better and better as I become a better AI host. Right. And as the AI learns a little bit more about what we're interested in as the consumer of the content itself. So please, if you listen to this, if you got to the end of this episode, I'd love to know what you thought about it, what you liked, what you didn't like, specific around the content, the flow, the layout, and what other issues you would like us to tackle. What's nice about the AI is it gives this to us straight. It's not trying to hide anything. It doesn't have a vested interest. It's not trying to sell us anything ultimately. So it's a really unique insight into, I won't say a neutral perspective, but maybe a more neutral perspective than what we're used to in how we consume content and learn in SPD on some of these topics that there are some vested interests sometimes from different perspectives. So I'm enjoying myself. I hope you are as well. And I want to thank you again for tuning in to this new style of content. I'm planning on doing at least a couple more of these as we get some out there in the space for you to listen to and think about. We'll see where it goes from here. But I want to thank you like we do each and every week here at Beyond Clean for all you do each and every day for patients, and encourage you until we talk to you again next time to keep fighting dirty.